welcome to my channel. My name's Angela and this is Devon Thread Tales. In this video we're going to be sewing together an ironing board cover. You will need some tracing paper, some pens or pencils, a ruler or seam gauge, some chalk, paper scissors, fabric scissors, heat-proof wadding, cotton fabric of your choice, 2.5 centimetre wide bias tape, some elastic, I've used 1 centimetre wide, some pins or some wonder clips. I've laid out the tracing paper, and in this example I'm tracing off my miniature ironing board just to show you how to trace it so I can show you on this video. I've laid my ironing board flat onto the tracing paper and I'm simply going to trace all the way around it. Now remove your ironing board and with either a seam gauge or a ruler you're going to measure 7.5 centimetres or 3 inches all the way around the mark that you have just made by tracing around your ironing board. You'll do this with a series of dashes and then you can join this up a little later. Once you have traced out all of your ironing board and you have added a 3 inch or 7.5 centimetre seam allowance all the way around the edge, you can now cut out this paper pattern piece. Now remove your cover or covers from your ironing board to get back to the original piece of heat wadding that is on the frame. Do not discard of this wadding as you will need this as a template for the new piece. Lay your new piece of wadding out on a flat surface and use the old piece of wadding as a template. As both of these fabrics have a sticky-like feeling to them, they will not slide around, so there's really no need to pin. Using any kind of pen, I've just used a marker pen so it's easier to draw onto the wadding. Trace around the original piece of wadding onto your new piece of wadding. Remove the old piece but do not discard. Not using your fabric scissors as this will blunt them, use a pair of paper scissors that you're not particularly precious about to cut out the line that you have just drawn around. Now lay out your chosen cotton fabric and using the template that you created earlier, draw this onto your cotton fabric. Once you've done this, you can then simply cut it out. This time you can use your fabric scissors. Now with your fabric facing right side up, using either your wonder clips or your pins, I've decided to use my pins in this case, you're going to take your bias tape, you're going to open out one side of it. Then you're going to fold it back by roughly 1/2 to 1 inch and then place this along the edge of your fabric. I'm pinning this in the actual crease of the bias binding, this is just easier, and you're going to simply pin this all the way around. When you get to any of the curves, don't worry too much about it being really neat. Obviously you do want it to lay as flat as possible, but it's almost impossible for it to lay totally flat when you're going around the particularly pointy end of the ironing board. Once you get to the other end, when you have pinned all the way around, overlap the bias binding and cut off the excess. You want it to be overlapping by roughly 1 inch. Now fold back the bias binding by again roughly 1 inch so that the two ends meet and they are just touching. It really doesn't matter how even each of those fold back sections are, so long as the bias binding is touching in the middle. This is going to create an opening and a channel for our elastic later on. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and just simply sewing along the bias binding fold line. We're just going to literally sew along. Make sure you don't sew over those pins. Once you have finished sewing your bias tape onto your fabric, you're then going to fold the bias tape over so that it is facing the wrong side of the fabric. You'll pin this in place and you'll pin this the whole way round the ironing board cover. On the straight edges, this is nice and straightforward. It is not quite so straightforward on the curved edges. It is very difficult to get this to lie totally flat as before. Don't worry too much, just do your best to get it to lie as flat as possible, remembering that once the elastic is in, it's going to pull it and ruche the whole of the ironing board cover anyway. We're now going to take this back to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along the inner edge of the bias tape, just a few millimetres away from the edge. This is going to create the channel. We don't have to leave any gaps for inserting the elastic because we have already created a small opening by folding back the bias tape when we originally started to pin this and sew this to the ironing board cover. We're now going to insert the elastic into the bias binding. To do this, you're going to pop a safety pin into one end of your elastic and you're going to leave your elastic longer than the circumference of your ironing board cover. It's important to do this so that you don't end up losing the elastic as you're pulling the elastic through the channel. You could also secure one end using a second safety pin. So begin by putting your safety pin through the little gap that we've left in our bias binding and then push it through with one hand, hold onto the safety pin through the fabric with one hand and pull the fabric back past the elastic with the other hand. You will get into a bit of a rhythm with this. It does take time, but you just need to take your time and pass the elastic through bit by bit. As you get to the end, you're then going to pop the safety pin through the gap again so that you'll have both ends of the elastic coming out through that small opening. Oops, I seem to have a bit of a knot in my elastic. So we're going to pull the elastic through the channel really a good excess amount, and then we're going to reposition that pin a little further up onto the elastic and repin it so that it's pinned together. You want to try and keep that out of the channel. Once that's nice and secure, you're then just going to pull the fabric around the elastic so it's a little bit more even. Don't worry about trying to get it so it's the right size for your ironing board for the moment. We're just trying to distribute the elastic a little bit more evenly around the fabric, or the fabric more evenly around the elastic. We're now going to start putting everything back onto your ironing board. So with your ironing board set up, as this is the easiest way to do it, I've actually put my heat-proof wadding from the original ironing board cover back onto the metal frame. I'm just doing this so it gives me a little bit of an extra piece of padding for my ironing board. Lay that out nice and flat, then take your new piece and lay that on top. Of course, if you want to, you can discard of your original piece altogether. You don't have to do as I have done here. So just try to straighten that all out and make sure there are no creases in it and that it's laying symmetrically across the ironing board frame. Then take your cover that you have prepared. Try and establish which is the pointy end and which is the more roundy end. And we're going to place that over the ironing board. At this point, you may end up needing to readjust the elastic a little bit, and you may need to change where your pin is on the elastic that you have pinned together. You may have done it too tight or too loose. So just take your time to lay the ironing board cover over, straightening it out, making sure that the heat proof underneath is not ruched up in any way. Once you've done this, you're then going to go to the elastic that's protruding from the channel of bias binding, and you're going to take the safety pin out of the elastic. Please don't do as I have and put the safety pin in your mouth. Please put it on the side. This was not a safe thing to do. You're going to pull the elastic as tight as you possibly can so that it is nice and secure around the underside of your ironing board. Tie this in a knot, and then you can take your scissors and cut off the excess elastic. Then pull the elastic knot and elastic back up into the opening and of the channel that you've created so that it's nicely hidden. And there you have it, a brand new ironing board cover for your iron, nice and fresh and new. And the beauty of doing it this way, so that it's not attached to your heat-proof wadding, is that you can make another version of this, and you can take this cover off and wash it and pop another one on. They're really quick and easy to make, and you could have lots of fun with using some bright and really fun fabric. I have just used this very pale yellow flowery fabric that I had lying around in my stash. But you don't have to use what's in your stash. You could go out and buy something new and exciting. So I hope that you've enjoyed watching this sew along. I hope that you have a little go at making your own ironing board cover. All of the details of anything that is out of the ordinary, like the heat-proof wadding, I'll put the descriptions of where I bought that in the description below. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a little go at making your own. Take care for now, and look out for another sew along soon. Bye.